Welcome friends and welcome to Biony Nirmal, and in this video we will discuss about the total nervous system, usually the summary of nervous system. Mainly we will focus on those regions which are really important for nervous system. Okay, so what we will learn in this video? So first of all we will see about the different parts of nervous system, and next we will see about the different cells and which is actually the important cells in nervous system, that is the neuroglia. Very briefly we will see the functions of neuroglia, and next we will see the another important cell, that is the neurons, and the different parts of neurons and their functions. And next we will see about the axon potential, the generation of axon potential, and actually the nerve impulse and how the propagations of this nerve impulse is seen in neurons. Okay, and also the different and the synaptic transmission, and cell actually transmitted from one neuron to another, and what is the role of neurotransmitter, we will see about this. And next the most important part in our central nervous system, that is the brain and the different parts of brain and their brief functions. Okay, and next we will see about the cerebral cortex, actually the outer regions of the brain, that is the cortex. So we will see the different functions of the different regions of cerebral cortex. And next we will see about the reflex action. So the brain we will discuss about the spinal cord and the functions of spinal cord, and mainly the reflex action and how spinal cord control the reflex action. Okay, and next an example of the reflex action, that is the patellar reflex, and this is a type of deep reflex, and how this reflexes is performed in our body, we will see this. And next the main divisions of our autonomic nervous system, actually the differences in between somatic and autonomic nervous system, and also the differences in between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and the neurotransmitter in sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and also the differences of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And at last we will see about the distribution of different types of nerves in sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So you can easily see that this is actually the overall of our nervous system, and this is the nervous system is really a hard topics, and I will focus only those regions which are usually confusing. And after viewing this video, I hope you can get a strong concept about the nervous system. Okay, so now let's start. Nervous system and the endocrine system together perform the vital functions in our body, which is called as the communication, right? So a nervous system actually communicate our body with external environment. So the information collected by the nervous system from external environment is called the stimulus, and the stimulus is also called as the change in the environment. Suppose in our environment there are present many of the stimulus, and this stimulus may be light or heat. So this may be light or heat, light, heat, and this may be sound, this may be temperature, pressure, gravity. So there are present different types of stimuli in our environment, and any changes in the stimulation can be detected by our nervous system. So nervous system can detect any changes of the environment, and then they actually processes this information, and according to the command of nervous system we respond according to this information. Okay, so this is actually the basic function of nervous system. Also the nervous system control the reflex action. Nervous system also control the reflex action, right? So any changes in our external environment or the stimulus, this is actually detected by nervous system, and according to these changes we respond for this specific stimulus. Okay, so this is actually the main function of our nervous system. And our nervous system is divisible into the two most important part. One is the central nervous system and another is peripheral nervous system or PNS. So central nervous system, you can see this is actually the diagram of the central nervous system, and in the central nervous system is made up of brain and the spinal cord, right? So the central nervous system is made up of brain and spinal cord, and we will see the structure of brain and also the structure and functions of the spinal cord, right? So the central nervous system is made up of brain and spinal cord. There are present different parts of brain. You can see the cerebrum, and in cases of human it is most developed, right? And apart from this, the brain is made up of various regions, the prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon, or the forebrain. Forebrain is made up of cerebrum or telencephalon and the diencephalon, and telencephalon is made up of olfactory lobe and the cerebrum, and the diencephalon is made up of epithalamus, thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The most of the part of brain remains covered by the cerebrum, because the cerebrum is highly developed in cases of human. Okay, and another part is present, this is actually called as the brainstem, and this brainstem is made up of medulla oblongata and also the midbrain and the pons. Okay, and there are present the cerebellum. This actually maintain the balance in our body. So these are actually the different parts of the brain, and the brain is a crucial portion of our central nervous system. And the brain is actually the only things in the universe which is attempting to know itself, right? Okay, and from this brain the spinal cord is present just beneath the brain, and this spinal cord is present inside our vertebral column. Okay, brain and spinal cord both are covered by meninges, right? So the central nervous system is made up of brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system are actually consisting of those types of neurons and which convey the information towards the central nervous system and also which convey the information to the effector. So peripheral nervous system are usually the two types. One is the afferent and another is efferent. So afferent and another is efferent. Okay, and afferent nervous system carry the information towards the central nervous system, and the efferent nervous system carry the information from the central nervous system towards the effector. Okay, and efferent nervous system are again divisible into the two parts. One is somatic nervous system and another is autonomic. So somatic nervous system and another is autonomic nervous system, right? Actually, I have told you that the efferent nervous system are those neurons which carry the information from central nervous system towards the effector, and this effector may be skeletal muscle. So this effector may be skeletal muscle, this effector may be the smooth muscles, and this may be of the gland. Okay, so the efferent neurons which carry the information towards the skeletal nervous system, they actually constitute the somatic nervous system, and autonomic nervous system activate the smooth muscles and the glands in our body. Autonomic nervous system are two types. One is the sympathetic division and another is parasympathetic division, and we should clearly learn about these two division, and these are very important. So sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Okay, and we will discuss about the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. So here you can see the diagram of the central nervous system. Efferent nervous system constitute those neurons which carry the information from our receptor towards the central nervous system, right? So these actually constitute the efferent nervous system. So these are the receptor, and the receptor take the sensation from the external environment, take the stimuli from the external environment. Okay, and this actually convey this information towards the central nervous system, and in the central nervous system there are presents the interneuron, and this actually processes this information, and after processing they actually provide the output or the way by which these skeletal muscles, smooth muscles or gland will respond, okay, by the command of this interneuron which is present in the central nervous system. So the efferent nervous system are those neurons. So the efferent nervous system actually constitute by those neurons which carry the information from central nervous system towards the effector, okay. So this effector may be of the skeletal muscles, and when this is skeletal muscles, then they constitute the somatic nervous system. So then they constitute the somatic nervous system, or this effector may be cardiac muscles, smooth muscles or gland, okay. So this may be cardiac muscles, smooth muscles and different types of glands, right. So this is actually the division of our nervous system, okay. And the peripheral nervous system actually form the different type of nerves, or the nerves which is originated from our brain, or the nerves which are originated from the spinal cord, and the nerve which originated from the brain are called as the cranial nerves, right. So the cranial nerves, and there are present 12 pairs of cranial nerves in human body, right. So the organisms which have the neck, these types of organisms have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, okay. And from the spinal cord, the spinal nerves originated, and in cases of human there are present 31 pairs of spinal nerve, okay. So 31 pairs of spinal nerves are present in cases of human, right. So these cranial nerves, or the 12 pairs of cranial nerves and the 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, are usually three types: the sensory nerve, mixed nerve and the motor nerve. The sensory nerve are those nerves which carry the information from our sensory receptor towards the central nervous system, okay. All spinal nerves are sensory nerves, so the nerves which are originated from the spinal cord, so these actually the sensory nerve, okay. And also 1, 2 and the 8, I have told you that there are present 12 pairs of cranial nerves, so 1, 2 and 8 spinal nerves are the sensory nerve, right, okay. 5, 7, 9 and 10 and these cranial nerves are the mixed nerve, so this is not motor, they are actually the mixed nerve, okay. And the motor nerve are actually those nerves which carry the information from central nervous system towards the effector, okay. And the mixed nerve actually perform both sensory and the motor function. So motor nerve constitute the 3, 4, 6, 11 and 12 cranial nerves. So 3, 4, 6, 11 and 12 cranial nerves, they are actually the motor nerves, okay. So next we will see the different cells. So different cells in nervous system, okay. And since we know that in our every system there are present the specific cell, okay, and the specific cell perform the specific function, right. So nervous system also made up of specific types of cell, and in nervous system there are present two types of specific cells. One is the neurons, and another type is the neuroglia, right, okay. So neurons and the neuroglia are two types of cells which constitute the total nervous system. Cells do not transmit the impulses. Actually, they support, nourish and insulate the neuron. The number of neuroglia in human nervous system is beyond our imagination. There are present 900 billions of neuroglia. So there are present 900 billions of neuroglia, or 9 times the estimated star in our galaxy, in our nervous system, okay. So can you imagine that there are present 900 billions of neuroglia in our nervous system, which is 9 times the estimated stars in our galaxy. And the neuroglia can divide, so neuroglia can be divided, okay, but neurons cannot divide, but neuroglia can divide. And most of the benign and the malignant tumors found in the nervous system originated from the neuroglial cell, okay. And here you can see the different types of neuroglia. So the first one is the astrocyte, and this is the star-shaped neuroglia, and the waves of astrocyte form the tight sheath around the brain's blood capillaries and pass the nutrients between the capillaries and the brain, okay. So these actually transmit the nutrients, so these transmit the nutrients to brain. So this is actually the function of our astrocyte. Okay, next is the microglia. So this is actually the microglia, and the main function of microglia is engulf the foreign materials and bacteria. Okay, so this is actually help in the immunity of our nervous system. So this engulf the foreign material and the bacteria in our nervous system. The next is the ependymal cell. So here you can see the ependymal cell, and which is consisting of many cilia. So this is actually resembles the epithelial cells in our body and forming the thin sheets that line the fluid-filled cavities in the brain and the spinal cord. May secrete the fluid, and the cilia of them helps in circulating the fluid, and this is actually the main function of ependymal cell. Okay, and the next cell is the oligodendrocyte. So this is actually the oligodendrocyte or oligodendroglia, and the cells with the few branching, and this oligodendroglia have the few branching and help to hold the nerve fiber together and produce the fatty myelin sheath around the nerve fiber of the central nervous system, and this actually insulate the total nervous system. Okay, so oligodendroglia actually produce the myelin sheath. This is important point. So they will produce the myelin sheath, right? Okay, so this is actually the function of oligodendroglia. Another type of neuroglia is the Schwann cell. So another type of neuroglia is the Schwann cell. This is found only in the peripheral nervous system. So found only in peripheral nervous system, and some function like the oligodendroglia, that is the supporting the nerve fibers and this forming the myelin sheath around them. So this Schwann cell form the myelin sheath. They form the myelin sheath around neuron. Okay, so this is actually the function of Schwann cell. Next, another important cell, this is actually the neuron, you can see. So this is the diagram of our neuron, and one of the most important cells in our nervous system. Actually, neurons is actually the structural unit of the nervous system, and this is highly specialized cells that conduct the messages in the form of nerve impulse from one part of body to another. And human brain contains about 100 billion of neurons, and which is 10% of the total neurons of nervous system. Okay, neuron actually can transmit the messages from one neuron to another in the form of action potential through the synapse. The gap in between the two neurons is called as synapse. Okay, and if we divide the neurons into the two part, one part is the cell body. So this part is actually the cell body, and this cell body contains the different organelles like any other cells. So there are present the nucleus, you can see, and also there are present the mitochondria, Golgi body, and different types of organelles are also present here. But the centrosome is usually inactive in cases of neuron, so neuron cannot divide. Okay, and in the neuron there are presence in the cell body, there are presence many granular structure. This is called as the nasal body, and this nasal body was discovered by Franz Nasal, and this is also called as the tigroid substances because of the spotted appearance they produce when properly stained. And this is present all over the soma. So this is present the soma or the cell body all over the soma, and also in the dendrites, but not within the axon. So the nasal body also presents in the dendrites. So here this is the cell body, and many branching from this cell body is called the dendrite. Okay, and in neuron the long branching is actually called as the axon. So cell body contains the different types of branching, and this branching or the dendrites receive the impulses from one neuron. Okay, or they can receive the impulses from the receptor. So this is actually the function of the dendrites, and the nasal body may be distributed over the dendrites, right? Okay, these are the small cavities and bound by the plasma membrane, and this is the basophilic granules. The nasal body is the basophilic granules, and from the membrane, and they hang the ribonucleoprotein. So this is made up of rRNA and the protein, and in short, the nasal granules are organelle that contain the ribosome, right? So this is actually the structure of the neuron cell body. The cell body is also called as the soma. Okay, so this is so in the cell body we can see the nucleus or any other organelle is there, but no centrosome, and which means the neuron cannot multiply. Okay, through the cytoplasm of each neuron are the fine strands. These are called as the neurofibrils. This is another important point, the neurofibrils, and it is bundle of thin microtubules and the microfilament, and thus form the cytoskeleton. The neurofibrils separate from the rough endoplasmic reticulum of the cell body into the darkly stained structure which is called as the nasal body. Neurofibril actually functions like the railway of the rapid transport of the molecules. So these are actually the neurofibrils. Okay, and this neurofibrils functions like the railway for the rapid transport of the molecules. And apart from the cell bodies, so the neurons is made up of the cell bodies and the processes I have told you. So the processes are usually the two type, the dendrites. So I have already told you about the dendrites. So the dendrites are actually the small branches which are originated from the cell bodies, and they receive the stimuli from another neuron, or they can receive the stimuli from the receptor. Okay, and next is the axon. The axon is actually in each neuron there are presents a single axon, and the initial region of the axon arise from the cone shaped area of the cell body, and this is called as the axon hillock. So this is the axon hillock, and which is a cone shaped structure, and from which the axons are originated. Okay, and then the narrows to form the slender processes which has the uniform diameter along its length. Although the neuron has only one axon, that axon often has one or more side branches, and these are called as the axon collateral. So here you can see these are the axon collateral. The axons usually are single branched, but some of the axons contain the many branches, so this is actually called as the axon collaterals. Okay, the terminal portion of the axon are knob like structure, and this is called as the synaptic knob, and this synaptic knob contains the neurotransmitter like acetylcholine or GABA, or various types of neurotransmitter are present in this synaptic knob. Okay, nerve impulse generated at the junction of the axon hillock and the axon. So the nerve impulse actually generated in this region, right? And the axon contains the same organelle found in the dendrites and the cell bodies, and except the nasal bodies and the Golgi bodies are not present here. Okay, and the structure involved with the protein synthesis and the packaging, and some of the axon are actually covered by the myelin sheath, and here you can see the myelin sheath. And when in cases of the neuron where the myelin sheath is present, and these neurons are called as myelinated neuron. So the neurons where the myelin sheath present, they are called as the myelinated neuron, and in these cases the axon potential move via the saltatory conduction. So move via saltatory conduction, right? Okay, and in between this myelin sheath there are presents a gap, and which is called as the node of Ranvier. So this is called as node of Ranvier. So axon, the saltatory conduction means the axon potential move from one node to another. So axon potential move by this way, and this is actually called as the saltatory conduction, and in this cases the axon potential move very fast. So axon potential move in myelinated fiber in very fast. Okay, by very fast, right? So here we will see another two important term. One is the nerve and another is the tract. Okay, so nerve and tract. So what is the nerves and what is tract? Any long axon of the neuron is called the nerve fiber. So long axon of neuron is called the nerve fiber, right? Nerve fiber, and the bundles of the specific nerve fiber are called the nerves. So you can see this is actually the neuron, so cell body, and this is the axon. So these are actually the axon, right? okay, and each of the nerve is surrounded by epineurium along with the blood vessels, okay. So there are actually so the long axon of the neuron is called the nerve fiber, and the bundles of the specific nerve fiber are called the nerves. So these bundles of this specific nerve fiber is called as the nerve, and their presence the blood vessels, and also there are presence of the lymph, okay. So this is actually called as the nerve. So this is actually the basic differences in between the neuron and the nerve. Long axons of the neuron actually form the nerve fiber, and a bundle of the nerve fiber is usually called as nerve, okay, and this nerve is covered by a membrane which is called as epineurium. So this is actually the epineurium, right? Now we will see that what is white matter and what is the gray matter. So first we will see the white matter, okay. What is white matter? The bundles of the myelinated fiber make up so-called the white matter of the nervous system. So you can if we draw the different types of neurons, so these are actually the neurons, okay, and these neurons the axon are covered by myelin sheath, so this actually form the myelin sheath, okay, and this myelinated nerve fiber, actually this myelin sheath form the white matter. So this will form the white matter, and the white matter or gray matter are very important in cases of central nervous system. That is, in case of brain and the spinal cord, the gray matter and white matter are important. So the myelin sheath usually form the white matter, right? In the peripheral nervous system, the white matter consists of myelinated nerve fiber, and in the central nervous system it is the myelinated tract, right? Okay, the unmyelinated nerves usually appear darker in comparison with the white matter. Actually the cell bodies and the unmyelinated nerve fiber form the gray matter. So the cell body and the unmyelinated nerve fiber form the gray matter. So this is actually the basic differences in between the gray matter and the white matter. So white matter, the myelinated nerve fiber form the white matter, and the unmyelinated nerve fiber and the cell body actually form the gray matter. And distinct regions of the gray matter within the central nervous system is called the nuclei. And another important term, sometimes you become confused that what is the nuclei. So the distinct regions of gray matter, distinct regions of gray matter form the nuclei, right? Okay, and in the peripheral nervous system, similar regions of the gray matter are called as the ganglion. So peripheral nervous system, in peripheral nervous system, the similar regions of the gray matter, so similar regions of gray matter form the ganglion, right? Okay, so we have discussed about the structure of neurons, and also the cell bodies and the processes of the neurons, and the myelinated and the non-myelinated nerve fiber, and usually the myelin sheath is made up of sphingomyelin, okay. And also we have talked about that what is the nerve and what is the tract, and the nuclei, and the white matter and the gray matter. Next we will discuss about the axon potential. This is an important event of the neurons, okay. Actually neuron transmit information from one neuron to another neuron by the process of axon potential. And now we will discuss about the axon potential, and which is also called as the nerve impulse, okay. Nerve impulse is actually the wave of electrical fluctuation that travels along the plasma membrane, or that travels along the axon, okay. In a neuron, the axon potential is also called as the nerve impulse, and this is typically generated only in the axon, okay. So we know that in our body there are present many of neurons, and each of the neurons are connected by the synapses, okay. So any of the stimulus, when any stimulus is applied in a particular neuron, the axon potential will be generated, and this axon potential is nothing but this is the wave of electrical fluctuation, or wave of electrical depolarization that actually travel along this axon, okay. And at last when it reaches towards the synaptic knob, then this causes the release of many neurotransmitter, and this neurotransmitter again activate the another neurons, and thus by this way this stimulus actually move from one neuron to another. So here we should learn about that how this axon potential is generated and what is the role of different types of ion channels in the plasma membrane of axon. Okay, usually we know that all cells, and so if it is a cell, and in all cells the interior of the plasma membrane remains always negative than that of the outside. So there may be developed a polarity. Okay, so outside of the plasma membrane is always positive and the inside of the plasma membrane remains always negative, and this is actually achieved by a special type of ion channel or the ATPase pump, and which actually pump the 3 Na plus or the 3 cation from cytosol to the outside of the cell, and this actually causes the entry of 2 K plus inside the cell from the extracellular matrix, right? So there will be always a deficit of the cation inside the plasma membrane. So the normal cell, the inside of the plasma membrane remains always negative. Okay, but if any stimulus is applied in the neurons, so this is also true for the neurons, but when a stimulus is applied to the neuron, this actually causes the inside of the cell becomes positive, inside of the cell membrane becomes positive, not cell, and the outside of the cell membrane becomes negative. So this is actually the reverse from the normal condition, and this is usually called as the axon potential, or this is called as nerve impulse. Okay, and usually in cases of resting neurons, so in cases of resting neuron, the inside of the cell is negative. Okay, so inside of the cell is negative, and the amplitude of this negativity is -70 millivolt, and this is called as the resting membrane potential. But which ion channels are responsible for maintaining this resting membrane potential? This is very important. And if we drop the axon membrane, if we draw the axonal membrane, then in this axon there are presents the sodium potassium ATPase pump I have told you. So this sodium potassium ATPase pump actually causes the exit of 3 Na plus or 3 Na plus ion from inside of the cell towards the outside. Okay, so this is the outside, this is the outside of the cell, and this is inside. So 3 Na plus actually efflux through the sodium potassium ATPase pump, and the 2K plus actually enters into the inside of the cell through the plasma membrane. So they make the inside of the plasma membrane negative. Okay, and apart from this, the K plus channel, so the K plus channel or the leakage K plus channel remains open in cases of resting neurons. So K plus channel always efflux from inside of the cell towards the outside. Okay, so the cation which enters into the cell, this will again move back towards the outside. Okay, so this will also causes the negativity inside the plasma membrane, and also the diffusion. Actually a few Na plus channel actually diffuse into the neuron. Okay, and anionic channel remains always closed. So anionic channel, that means the chloride channels remains always closed. So resting membrane potential is usually controlled by sodium potassium ATPase pump. So sodium potassium ATPase pump, and this sodium potassium ATPase pump remains open during the time of a resting neuron. Okay, when the neuron is in rest, and the leakage Na plus channel closed. So leakage Na plus channel remains closed during the resting neuron. Okay, and also the anion channel remains closed, and the anion channel also remains closed. And the most important is the sodium and potassium voltage gated ion channel. So sodium and potassium voltage gated ion channel, and this also remains closed during the resting condition. So here you can see the different type of ion channels in a resting neuron. Okay, role of the ion channels in maintaining the resting membrane potential, that is the maintaining the -70 millivolt inside the neuron. Okay, actually the minus sign indicates the charge inside the cell, right? Okay, and if this is positive, plus if this signs becomes the positive, then inside becomes positive, and if this is negative, then the inside becomes negative, and this is the magnitude. So 70 is the magnitude of this voltage, right? Okay, so role of ion channels in maintaining the resting membrane potential. Some K plus channels are open in a resting membrane. So here you can see that the some K plus channels remains open in the resting membrane. So the Na plus K plus ATPase pump, which causes the out of 3 Na plus channel, and this causes the entry of the 2 K plus ion channel into the cell, and the 3 Na plus outside of the cell. Okay, so this K plus ion which enters into the interior of the cell, this again becomes come back to the exterior of the cell by this channel, right? So the K plus channels are open in the resting membrane, allowing the K plus diffuse down its concentration gradient out of the cell, and thus add to the excess positive ions on the surface of the plasma membrane. Diffusion of the Na plus in the opposite direction would counteract this effect, but is prevented doing so by closed Na plus channel. Compared the figure. Okay, so here the Na plus channel remains closed, and also the K plus channels remains closed, and when any of the stimulus is added, then this Na plus channel will be open, and this causes the entry of the more Na plus inside the cell, and this will actually causes the inside of the cell becomes positive. Okay, so this is actually the main causes of the action potential. The action potential means, I have told you, that inside becomes positive than the resting membrane potential, in which the inside remains negative. Okay, so by the action potential, the Na plus channel will be open, and this will causes the entry of the Na plus inside the cell, and this actually causes the inside of the plasma membrane becomes positive. Okay, so this is actually the main functions of action potential. This is actually the main causes of action potential. So here you can see a graph which describe clearly about the generation of action potential. Okay, so all the voltage gated ion channel Na plus and the K plus ion channels remains closed during the resting state. So in the resting state, all Na plus and K plus ion channel remains closed. So all Na plus and K plus channel remains closed. Okay, and the inside of the cell remains minus 70 MV, and this is actually called as resting membrane potential. And here only, and during this time only the leakage K plus channel opens, so the K plus move out of the cell, and outside of the membrane is positive, and the inside of the membrane is negative, and the resting membrane is minus 70 MV. So here the inside of the cell remains negative during this time, and the outside of the membrane remains positive. That is, the outside the Na plus ion concentration is high than the inside, so the inside of the membrane remains negative, and this is actually called as resting membrane potential. Next is the depolarization and the threshold potential. When a stimulus is applied at a spot of the nerve fiber, so in the nerve fiber, when we provide a stimulus, okay, and this will cause the some of the Na plus channel will be open. So here you can see that some of the Na plus channel will be open when a stimulus is added. So when a stimulus added, the sum of the Na plus channel remains open. So some Na plus remains open. Okay, and Na plus diffuse rapidly into the cell. So Na plus diffuse rapidly into the cell, and this will causes, and because of the concentration gradient and the electrochemical gradient, and this actually produces a local depolarization. So in this spot the Vm value falls, and that is from the original resting membrane potential the value becomes minus 65 MV or even the minus 59 MV. Okay, so from the minus value, this actually move towards the zero value, right? So first in the resting membrane potential, this is minus 70 MV, and when any stimulus is added, then the Na plus channel will be opened, and this will causes the movement of the Na plus ion into the neuron, and so the magnitude of the membrane potential becomes minus 59 MV, and this minus 59 MV is usually called as the threshold potential. So threshold potential is minus 59 millivolt. Okay, and if the action potential, or and if this action potential actually surpasses this minus 59 MV, okay, and if the strength of the stimuli is weak, then the value never attain the minus 59 MV and the no action potential will be developed, and this minus 59 MV is called as the threshold potential. If the magnitude of the local depolarization surpasses the limit of the threshold potential, then the more Na plus channel will be opened. Okay, so if this local depolarization surpasses, then the additional Na plus channel will be open. Okay, so if this surpasses, then the additional Na plus channel will be open. Additional Na plus channel will be open, right? And this will causes, and as the more Na plus channel are stimulated to open, the more Na plus rushes into the cell. So the more Na plus into the cell, so more Na plus rushes into the cell. Okay, more Na plus rushes into the cell, and the membrane moves rapidly towards the 0 MV. So membrane potential moves rapidly towards the 0 MV. Here the membrane potential moves rapidly towards the 0 MV, and at last this will reach at the plus 30 MV. Okay, and this plus 30 MV is actually the maximum depolarization, and this plus 30 MV and this in these cases the action potential is usually called as the spike potential. So now the interior of the cell membrane becomes positive and the exterior of the same becomes the negative. So at its peak the interior is plus 30 or plus 40 MV, and the total height of the action potential now the minus 70 to plus 30. So this is actually the 100 millivolt. Okay, from the resting membrane potential the total action potential will be now in the 100 millivolt. Okay, so this is actually the changes of the voltage inside the neuron, and when the action potential reaches at the peak, the interior of the cell membrane becomes restore its negativity, and soon it reaches at the resting membrane potential. So and during this time the K plus channel will be open, so the the depolarization will again move back towards the minus value, and this is actually called as the repolarization. Okay, and when this repolarization surpasses the threshold potential, and then it again come back into the resting membrane potential, that is the minus 50 MV, and in these cases the K plus channel will be open. Okay, so the action potential is generated by opening of Na plus channel. Okay, and when this actually surpasses the threshold potential, then additional Na plus channel will be open. So Na plus channel is responsible for generation of action potential. Okay, so during this time the additional Na plus channel will be open, and the repolarization is caused. So the repolarization, that is the membrane again moves back towards its negative value, or inside of the membrane becomes the negative due to the opening of the K plus channel. Okay, and thus by this way the action potential is generated inside the neurons. Okay, and here is the diagram of the synaptic transmission. So this is the diagram of synaptic transmission, right? And when the action potential actually move along the axon and reaches towards the synaptic nerve, and during this time the voltage gated calcium channel will be open towards the synaptic nerve, and this will causes the movement of the calcium ion into the synaptic nerve. Okay, and this actually binds with the many of the vesicles this containing the neurotransmitter, and this causes the releases of this neurotransmitter into the synapse. So here you can see the synapse is actually spaces in between the two neuron. Okay, so when action potential actually reaches at the tip of the axon, that is at the synaptic nerve, so during this time the calcium ion actually enters into the synaptic nerve, and this will binds with the vesicles which containing the neurotransmitter, and this causes the release of this neurotransmitter into the synapse. So synapse is the space, a small space in between the two adjacent neuron. Okay, and and then the neurotransmitter actually bind with its receptor. So these are the receptor of the neurotransmitter, and due to the binding of this receptor, and this actually causes the opening of Na plus ion channel of the next neuron. Okay, so this actually generated the action potential in this neuron. And so in the next neuron, which is not actually stimulated, but this is stimulated by this presynaptic neuron. So the neuron which is present just before this synapse, this is called as the presynaptic neuron, and the neuron which is present just after the synapse, and this is called as the postsynaptic neuron. And when this postsynaptic neuron receive the acetylcholine or the neurotransmitter, then the Na plus channel will be open. So these neurons, in this neuron, the action potential will be generated, and again by this way, when this action potential actually reaches at the axon terminal, then this again actually releases the neurotransmitter. Okay, so this will releases the neurotransmitter, and this again activate the another neuron, and thus by this way action potential actually move from one neuron to another, and at last these neurons will be activate the muscles. Okay, so the neurons and the muscles, this junction is called as the neuromuscular junction. So this junction is called as the neuromuscular junction, and in this neuromuscular junction the neurotransmitter will be released, and this released neurotransmitter again causes the opening of another ion channels inside the muscle. Okay, and this will activate the muscles. So this will activate the muscles, and this is actually called as excitation and contraction coupling process. Okay, excitation and contraction, right? And due to the opening of this ion channel inside the muscles, this causes the contraction of the muscles, and this is called as excitation, contraction and coupling process, right? Okay, and thus by this way the action potential actually functions. So action potential is generated by a stimulus, and when this stimulus is very strong, then the action potential will be generated, and if this stimulus is weak, then the action potential cannot surpass the threshold potential, and this is actually called as the local potential, right? So this is actually the all about the action potential. And we'll focus is and now we will focus an important regions of our central nervous system, that is the human brain. And already we have talked about the different cells of the nervous system, that is the neurons and the neuroglia, and also the generation of the action potential and the transmission of this action potential through the synapse. We have already discussed about it. Okay, and now we will go through our brain. Actually, you know, the brain forms embryologically from the neural tube, and which is situated at the anterior of the spinal cord, and central nervous system actually comprises by brain and the spinal cord, and the brain is protected by the cranium, and while the spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column. Okay, so first we will discuss about the brain, and next we will discuss about the spinal cord. And you know that the human brain is only things in the universe and which is attempting to understand itself, and the study of the brain is called as the encephalogy. And brain is located in the cranial cavity of the skull, and the cranial bones protect it from the mechanical injury, and 98% of the weight of a whole central nervous system is our brain, and average weight of human brain is 1200 to 1400 gram, and there are presence about 100 billions of neurons, and brain is very much soft of whitish and the flattened organ. Okay, actually the brain is covered by a covering which is called as the meninges, and the meninges have three covering. Okay, so we will now talking about the brain, right? Okay, so brain is covered by the meninges, and the meninges have three covering. And how you will remember this covering? You will remember this covering by a word, that is the pad. Okay, so if this is a brain, and the brain is covered by pia matter, arachnoid matter and the dura matter, so these are the three coverings of our meninges, and the innermost covering is the pia matter, and the next is arachnoid matter, and the outermost is the dura matter, and which is attached with the bones of our skull. Okay, And the regions, you can see this is the regions in between the arachnoid matter and the pia matter, and there are presents a specific fluid which is called as cerebrospinal fluid, and this cerebrospinal fluid is present at the subarachnoid space. Okay, and this cerebrospinal fluid are secreted from the choroid plexus. This is an important actually that the where from where the cerebrospinal fluid is secreted. Okay, so cerebrospinal fluid is secreted from the choroid plexus, right? Okay, and if we see the different parts of brain, actually the brain have three regions: the forebrain or the forebrain, and the midbrain, forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. Okay, so these are actually the three different parts of brain: the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. And the forebrain have two regions, the telencephalon and the diencephalon. So forebrain have two regions, the telencephalon and diencephalon. Okay, so telencephalon and the diencephalon are the two most important part of forebrain, and the hindbrain is actually consisting of three most important part: the pons, medulla oblongata. So the pons, medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. So these are the three important part of midbrain, cerebellum. Okay, and the midbrain and the hindbrain, or the midbrain and the pons and the medulla oblongata forms the brainstem. And here you can see the diagram of the total brain. So the midbrain, so this is actually the midbrain, you can see. So this portion is the midbrain, and this is actually the pons. So this regions is the pons and the medulla oblongata. So these three portion form the brainstem, right? And just above the brainstem there represents the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. Okay, telencephalon has two part, the olfactory lobe and cerebrum, and these are the two part of telencephalon actually, olfactory lobe and the cerebrum. And the olfactory lobe is not well developed in case of human, and the olfactory lobe are well developed in those organisms which rely on the smell, right? Okay, the olfactory lobe have the olfactory stalk and the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory lobe is surrounded by cerebrum in cases of human. Okay, actually the cerebrum is the most important and the most largest part of the brain. So this part is the cerebrum, and this covers the entire regions of the brain actually. Okay, and this is actually the mid sagittal sections of the brain, and this reveals the features of its major division. So this part is the cerebrum, right? And if we draw a simplified diagram, so the brain have the two cerebrum. Okay, actually, and the brain have the cerebrum, and the cerebrum is the largest part of brain, and this cerebrum is made up of two hemisphere. One is the left hemisphere and another is right hemisphere. Okay, and these hemisphere are actually called as the cerebral hemisphere, and these two hemisphere are connected by a nerve tract, and which is called as the corpus callosum. Okay, and there are presents many convolutions and the many depression, and this depression, the deep depression, are called as the fissure. Okay, and this depression which are not so deep, this is called as the sulcus, and this portion which are the elevated portion, these are actually called as the gyrus of cerebrum, right? Okay, so these gyruses, there are presents many of the gyruses are present here, and so this looks like a sausage shaped structure. Okay, so the elevation of the cerebrum is called the gyrus, and the depression is called as the sulcus, and the deep depression is called as fissure. Okay, and the median fissure actually divide the cerebrum into two halves, and these are called as the left cerebral hemisphere. So this is the left cerebral hemisphere, and this is the right cerebral hemisphere. So this is a right cerebral hemisphere. Actually the left cerebral hemisphere control the function of our right side of body, and the right cerebral hemisphere control the left side of body. Okay, and from the cerebral hemisphere the olfactory lobe are developed. So these are the olfactory lobe, and olfactory lobe have the stalk, and this is actually the swelling of this olfactory lobe. Actually this olfactory lobe is surrounded by the cerebrum. Okay, and The cerebrum controls the skeletal muscle contraction and is the center for learning, emotion and the memory and the perception. So this actually control the skeletal muscle contraction, and this is the most largest part of the brain, and it is divided, I have already told you that it is divided into the right and left cerebral hemisphere, and the outer layer of the cerebral hemisphere is called as the cerebral cortex, and this is vital for perception and the voluntary movement and the learning. The left side of the cerebral cortex receives the information from and controls the movement of the right side of the body and vice versa. A band of axons known as the corpus callosum enables the right and left cerebral cortexes to communicate, and the deep within the white matter, the clusters of the neurons are called the basal nucleus. So there are present a cluster of neurons in the deep of cerebrum, and these are called as the basal nuclei, and these serve as the centers for planning and learning and the movement sequences. Okay, damages to this side, so that the damages to the site of this cerebral nuclei is fatal development can result in the cerebral palsy, a disorder resulting from a disruption in the transmission of motor commands to the muscles. Okay, so this is actually the all about the cerebrum, right? And the cerebrum have different regions. So cerebrum have the different regions. So here you can see these are the different regions of cerebrum, and the cerebrum, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe, and each regions have the specific function. Okay, and the frontal lobe perform the decision making and the planning, and also this control the skeletal muscle, right? Okay, and the parietal lobe is actually the sensory association area and integration of the sensory information, and also these have the sense of touch. Okay, and this lobe, which is the occipital lobe, and this causes the visual association of the cortex, and this combining the images and the object of recognition. Actually the superficial part of the cerebrum is the cortex, so these are the different regions of the cortex. Okay, and here and another important part is present in the occipital lobe, which is called as the visual cortex, and this processing the visual stimuli and the pattern of the recognition, right? Okay, and the next part is the temporal lobe, and in the temporal lobe the auditory cortex is present, which helps in hearing, and there are present another region which is called as the Wernicke's area, and this comprehending the language. Okay, and also in the frontal lobe there are present the Broca's area. This is very important. This actually helps in forming the speech. So this Broca's region helps in forming the speech. So the outermost covering of the cerebrum is called as the cerebral cortex, and inside the cerebral cortex there are present many white matter, and this is actually the subcortical region. Okay, this cerebrum and the second part of the forebrain, or this cerebrum, is connected with the diencephalon. Actually this covered the diencephalon, so this is the diencephalon. So this portion is called as the diencephalon, and diencephalon has three regions. Actually diencephalon has three regions: the epithalamus, thalamus and the hypothalamus. So this is the region of diencephalon. This region is the diencephalon, and the roof of the diencephalon is the epithalamus, and the next portion is the thalamus, and the lower portion is the hypothalamus. And you know that hypothalamus is a very important regions, and diencephalon has the three regions. The roof is called as the epithalamus, and the middle portion is the thalamus, and the lower region is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus constitute a control center that includes the body's thermostat as well as the central biological clock. Actually the hypothalamus regulate our body temperature, and this also regulates our hunger and our thirst. Okay, so this there are present few important centers for hunger center, and also there are present satiety center, and also there are present the thirst center, which control for intake our food and also the water. Okay, and the pituitary gland remains associated with this hypothalamus, and you know that from the hypothalamus many releasing hormones are secreted, and these hormones actually control the function of the pituitary gland. Okay, so this is all about the diencephalon, and then the diencephalon is connected. The diencephalon is connected with the midbrain, and the midbrain is another important part of our brainstem. And from the midbrain is also connected with the pons and medulla oblongata. Okay, so this is the midbrain, and this is pons and this is medulla oblongata. So in this diagram you can see the midbrain, pons and the medulla oblongata, this constitute the brainstem, right? Okay, and the pons and medulla oblongata are very important, and the midbrain receives and integrates the several types of sensory information and sends it to the specific regions of the forebrain. Okay, and the thalamus is also called as the relay center, which I have forgotten to told you that the thalamus is called as the relay center. Okay, and all the sensory axons involved in hearing either terminate in the midbrain or pass through it on their way to the cerebrum. In addition, the midbrain coordinates the visual reflexes. So midbrain coordinates the visual reflexes, and also the head turns toward an object approaching from the side without the brain having formed an image of the object. A major function of the pons and medulla is to transfer the information between the pons and the midbrain and the forebrain. The pons and the medulla also help coordinating the large scale of the body movement, such as the running and the climbing. So the pons and medulla oblongata helps in running and the climbing, and the most axons that carry the instruction about these movements are crossed from one side of the central nervous system to the other in the medulla. As a result, the right side of the brain controls much of the movement of the left side of body and vice versa. In addition to the function of medulla is to control the several autonomic homeostatic functions, including the breathing, heart and blood vessels activity, swallowing, vomiting and the digestion. The pons also participate in some of these activities. For example, it regulates the breathing centers in the medulla. This is very, very important. So the pons actually regulates the breathing center inside the medulla. And the another part is of the hindbrain is the cerebellum, and this is the second largest part of our brain, and cerebellum receives the sensory information about the positions of the joints and the lengths of the muscles, as well as input from the auditory and the visual system. It also monitors the motor commands issued by the cerebrum. The cerebellum integrates this information as it carries out coordinating and error checking during the motor and the perceptual functions. Head-eye coordination is an example of the cerebellar control, and if the cerebellum is damaged, the eyes can follow a moving object, but they will not stop at the same place as the object. Hand movement toward the object will also be erratic. Okay, and the cerebellum also have the cerebellar hemisphere, and it has the outer region is the cortex, but the sulcus and gyrus are not so prominent in the cerebellum, and the white matter actually form the arbor vitae. Okay, and another important regions or another important part which is present in the brain are the brain ventricles, and there are present 4 ventricles inside the brain, and the first and the second ventricle is present in the left and the right cerebral hemisphere, and the third ventricle is present in the diencephalon. Okay, and these ventricles, the first and second ventricle and the third ventricle, are connected by foramen Monro. So these are connected by foramen Monro. Okay, the fourth ventricle runs through the midbrain, and the connection of the third and the fourth ventricle is the Aqueduct of Silvius. So there presents the Aqueduct of Silvius. Aqueduct of Silvius is present in between the third and the fourth ventricle. Okay, so the fourth ventricle is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord. The fourth ventricle is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord, and the 3 openings marks the wall of the fourth ventricle, one situated in the midline of the roof, which is called as the foramen magenta, and the 2 lateral, the foramina lusca, in its side wall. The appearance, the apertures connect the ventricle to the subarachnoid space, a fluid filled space surrounding the brain. Okay, and the chloride plexus is another important term which I have told you, that the cerebrospinal fluid is actually synthesized from this chloride plexus, and the ventricle contains the capillaries. So these ventricles contain the capillaries, and which are derived from the internal choroid and internal carotid and the posterior cerebral artery. The chloride plexuses are the tough are the tuft of such capillaries projected in the cavities in the ventricle. So these are the capillaries and which are projected in the ventricle, and the chloride plexus are principal sites for the cerebrospinal fluid secretion. Okay, so this is all about the brain, and next we will go through our spinal cord. Spinal cord is another important part of our central nervous system, and this actually develops from the caudal portion of the neural tube. And the spinal cord is enclosed by the vertebral column, and this extends from the foramen magnum of the skull to the L1, lumbar 1 or the lumbar 2 vertebra just inferior to the ribs. And like the brain, the spinal cord is also protected by the bone meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. And cerebrospinal fluid present in the subarachnoid space between the pia mater and the arachnoid mater. So this is actually the diagram of the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord the many of the spinal nerves actually arise, and there are present 3 pairs of spinal nerve. So these are actually the spinal nerve, and the spinal cord is protected. The spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column. So these are the vertebral column, and the spinal nerve are actually so these are actually the vertebral column. So this is the vertebral column, okay, vertebral column, and this is the spinal cord, and these are the spinal nerve. So these are the spinal nerve, right? Okay. And the cavity in the spinal cord is called as the neurosyll. So this is the neurosyll, and the spinal nerve exit through the intervertebral foramen. So these foramen are called as the intervertebral foramen, and the spinal cord terminates in a tapering cone-shaped structure. So this is a tapering cone-shaped structure, you can see, and this is called as the conus medullaris. So this portion of the spinal cord is called as conus medullaris. Okay. And the phylum terminally a fibrous extension of the conus. So the fibrous extension of the conus is called the phylum terminally. So these are called as phylum terminally, which are the fibrous extension of the conus, and the spinal cord anchors in the coccyx via this phylum terminally. And so since the spinal cord anchors in the coccyx via the phylum terminally, so it does not jostled by the bony movement. Okay, and 31 pairs of spinal nerve are actually arises from the spinal cord, and this constitute another large part of our peripheral nervous system. And if we see the cross section of the spinal cord, and we can see the gray and the white matter in the spinal cord. So here these are actually the gray matter, you can see, and the gray matter is the H-shaped structure. Okay, the gray matter, and this is the white matter, and the gray matter is internal, and this surrounds a central canal. Alright, and it has also form of the letter H in the cross section, and the central canal directly connected with the fourth ventricle. Gray matter arms are called the column or the horns, and there are present the anterior horn containing the nerve cell bridges which give rise to the somatic motor nerve. So there are present the 3 column actually, the anterior horn. So this is actually the anterior median fissure. So this portion is called as anterior median fissure, and this portion, this region is called as the posterior median fissure. Okay, and this is actually called as the anterior column of the gray matter, and this is the lateral column of the gray matter, and this is the posterior column of the gray matter, right? So the gray matter has the 3 column, the anterior column, the lateral column, and the posterior column. So there will be also present the anterior, lateral, and the posterior column of the gray matter, and the white matter have the, this is the posterior column of the white matter, and this is the lateral column of the white matter, and this is the anterior column of the white matter. So gray matter and the white matter actually form the different column. Okay, now the posterior horn receive the sensory nerve via the dorsal root ganglion. So the posterior column of the gray matter receive the sensory nerve via the dorsal root ganglion, and the motor nerve actually release from the anterior column of the gray matter, right? Okay, and the motor nerve originates from the anterior horn of the gray matter. Okay, and the main function of the spinal cord is to control the reflex action, and in the reflex action there are present three most important neurons. The sensory neuron actually receive the information from our sensory receptor, and this sensory neuron have the ganglion. This is called as the dorsal ganglion. So this is actually the sensory neuron, or this is the efferent neuron, and they receive the information from our receptor, and then this carry the information towards the spinal cord. Okay, so these are actually the efferent neuron, and in the spinal cord this is the connector neuron or the interneuron. In the spinal cord there are present the connector neuron or the interneuron, and this process this information, and then this actually activate the another neuron which is called as the motor neuron. Okay, and this motor neuron is connected with the effector, and this effector may be skeletal muscle, smooth muscles, or the gland, right? So this is this pathway, this neuronal pathway is simply called as the reflex arc. So reflex arc is consisting of the three neurons, the sensory neuron or the efferent neuron, and the interneuron and the motor neuron. So these are actually the three important neurons. So sensory neuron receive the information from the receptor, and this carry this information towards the central nervous system, or towards the central nervous system, or towards the spinal cord, and here this information is processed, and then this information actually move to the motor neuron or the efferent neuron. So this is called as the efferent neuron, and this efferent neuron connected with the effector. Okay, so this pathway is usually called as our simple reflex arc. Okay, and a diagram of the patellar reflex, or this is also called as the knee jerk reflex, and the two muscles are actually involved for these reflexes, and this and one is the quadriceps muscles and another is the hamstring muscle. So there are present the hamstring muscle. Okay, and the reflex is initiated artificially by tapping the tendon connected to the quadriceps muscle. So this tendon is connected with this quadriceps muscles, and the reflex is initiated by tapping. So this is actually the tapping event, and this tapping actually activate the quadriceps muscles, and the sensor, there are present the sensor, and this sensor detect a sudden stretch in the quadriceps, and the sensory neuron convey this information to the spinal cord. So due to the tapping and the stretch receptor actually receive this signal, and then this signal actually move via the sensory neuron towards the spinal cord. Okay, and this signal is actually conveyed via the motor neuron to the quadriceps muscles, causing it to contract and the jerking the lower leg forward. So this causes the jerking of the lower legs forward. Okay, and another important interneuron in the spinal cord also receives from this sensory neuron. So here you can see another important motor neuron. This receive the information from another interneuron. Okay, this motor neuron that lead to the hamstring muscle are inhibited by the interneuron, and this inhibition prevents the contraction of the hamstring, which would resist the action of the quadriceps. Okay, so this is a simplified diagram of a reflex action. So the here the reflex is initiated. So the reflex is initiated in cases of knee jerk reflex. The reflex is initiated by tapping tendon, and which is connected with our quadriceps muscles. So this is connected with our quadriceps muscles, right? Okay, and next the sensory information. So this sensory information move via the efferent or the sensory neuron. So this sensory information or this stretching information actually move via the efferent neuron towards the spinal cord. Okay, and in the spinal cord there are present the two interneuron, actually the two interneurons. So interneuron 1 and interneuron 2, there are present two interneuron, the interneuron 1 and interneuron 2, and the interneuron 1 activate those motor neurons. So this activate the motor neuron which is connected with the quadriceps muscles. Okay, and which is connected with the quadriceps muscles, and this actually causing the contraction of the quadriceps muscles, and so that the jerking the lower leg forward, so lower leg actually move forward, and so this is called as the knee jerk reflex. Okay, and another interneuron actually carry this information or send this information to another motor neuron, and this motor neuron is connected with the hamstring muscle. Okay, so this motor neuron is connected with the hamstring muscle, and this hamstring muscle is inhibited. These hamstring muscles is inhibited during the knee jerk reflex. Okay, so this is an excellent example of the knee of an reflex action, right? We have already talked about the central nervous system, that is our brain and the spinal cord, and now we will go through our peripheral nervous system. And you know, the peripheral nervous system is made up of afferent nervous system and the efferent nervous system. So afferent neurons are those neurons which carry the information towards the central nervous system. Okay, and in the efferent nervous system is divisible into the two part. One is the somatic and another is autonomic. This is very, very important. Okay, so somatic and autonomic nervous system, right? The somatic nervous system are those constitute those neurons which carry the information from central nervous system to the skeletal muscle. So here the effector organs are skeletal muscle. Okay, and in cases of autonomic nervous system, the effector are cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle, this may be smooth muscles or this may be the glands. So these are actually the different divisions of our efferent nervous system. And here and another important differences you should learn, that what the differences in between the somatic and the autonomic pathway. The somatic pathway is actually the efferent and the autonomic pathway is also efferent, because these are the two different division of our efferent nervous system. Okay, and number of neurons between the central nervous system and the effector, this is an important point. This of somatic nervous system, in between the central nervous system and the effector there are presents the single neuron. Okay, but in cases of autonomic nervous system, in between the central nervous system and the effector there are presents two neuron. Okay, so this is actually the one of the most important differences in between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. In case of somatic nervous system, there are present single neuron between central nervous system and the effector, but in autonomic nervous system there are present two neuron in between the central nervous system and the effector. Okay, and so the somatic motor neuron is one and the autonomic motor neuron are actually the two, and the first neuron is called the preganglionic neuron. So this is the preganglionic neuron, and another neuron is called as the postganglionic neuron. So this is postganglionic neuron. And somatic nervous system, the myelin sheath is present. So in this neuron the myelin sheath is present, but in cases of autonomic nervous system the preganglionic neuron contain the myelin sheath, but postganglionic neuron do not contain the myelin sheath. Okay, and the most of the cranial nerves and the all spinal nerves are the somatic motor neuron, and most cranial nerves and the all spinal nerves are the autonomic neuron. Okay, and effector organs, I have already told you, the skeletal muscles, that is the voluntary, and the in autonomic pathway the effector organs are cardiac muscles, smooth muscles and the gland, that is they function as involuntary. Okay, and here the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and in cases of autonomic pathway the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine and norepinephrine. So these are actually the basic differences in between the somatic and autonomic pathway. This is very, very important. Okay, now we will go through the divisions in between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system can be divisible into the two part. One is the sympathetic and another is parasympathetic. Okay, so in autonomic nervous system there are present two neurons in between the central nervous system and the effector, and one is the preganglionic neuron and another is postganglionic neuron, and the preganglionic neuron is myelinated and the postganglionic neuron is not myelinated. Okay, and the two neurotransmitter are present in this autonomic nervous system. One is the acetylcholine and another is norepinephrine. This is very, very important. Now we will see that where this acetylcholine neurotransmitter acts and where this norepinephrine neurotransmitter acts. This here you can see a simplified diagram, and I have already told you that the autonomic nervous system are divisible into the two part. One is the sympathetic and another is parasympathetic. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division, and here we will draw the three set of neuron, right? So these all are preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. So the sympathetic division, in cases of sympathetic division, the preganglionic neuron release acetylcholine. So preganglionic neuron can release acetylcholine, and in sympathetic division all the preganglionic neuron release acetylcholine, and the parasympathetic division also the preganglionic neuron release acetylcholine. So all of the preganglionic neuron in autonomic nervous system release the acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. Okay, and the acetylcholine receptor are the nicotinic receptor. So nicotinic receptor are present in all of these postganglionic neurons. So there are presents the nicotinic receptor. So these are the nicotinic receptor, and this nicotinic receptor binds by this acetylcholine. Okay, but in cases of sympathetic division, some of the postganglionic neuron release norepinephrine, right? But the rest of the postganglionic neuron release the acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, and if this is the effector organ, then there will be presence of muscarinic receptor. Okay, so this acetylcholine binds with the effector in muscarinic receptor. So there will be presence muscarinic receptor in the effector of so the muscarinic receptor are present here, and this and through in this muscarinic receptor the acetylcholine binds with this effector organ. So muscarinic receptors are present in the effector organ, and the acetylcholine binds with this muscarinic receptor. Okay, and the few postganglionic neuron in cases of sympathetic division, they release the norepinephrine, and this norepinephrine binds with the adrenergic receptor. So norepinephrine binds with the adrenergic receptor in some effector organ of sympathetic division. So this is the neurotransmitter of sympathetic nervous system, and this is the neurotransmitter of parasympathetic division. Okay, so in sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division, both preganglionic neuron release the acetylcholine, and this acetylcholine binds with the adrenergic receptor, or this actually binds with this. In these cases the adrenergic receptor are the nicotinic receptor. So these are bind with the nicotinic receptor, and all the postganglionic neuron have the nicotinic receptor, and the acetylcholine binds with this nicotinic receptor, and the few of the postganglionic neuron in cases of sympathetic division release the norepinephrine, and this norepinephrine binds with the adrenergic receptor of the effector organ, and this postganglionic neuron release acetylcholine. So few sympathetic postganglionic neuron release norepinephrine, and few release the acetylcholine. Okay, and this acetylcholine binds with the muscarinic receptor of the effector organ, and also the parasympathetic postganglionic neuron release acetylcholine, and which binds with the muscarinic receptor. Okay, now we will see the differences in between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division, its ganglion are linked, so there the differences in between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division, this is also important. Okay, so sympathetic and the parasympathetic division, sympathetic division form the chain ganglion, so they will form the chain ganglion. Okay, and the parasympathetic division, the chain ganglion, the ganglions are isolated, so the no chain ganglion is developed in parasympathetic nervous system. The preganglionic fibers emerge with spinal nerve, that is the thoracolumbar. So the sympathetic nervous system, the nerve are thoracolumbar, these are originated from the thoracolumbar region, and but parasympathetic nervous system, the efferent neuron are originated from craniosacral region. So these are originated from craniosacral region. Okay, and the preganglionic fiber are shorter. So preganglionic neuron in cases of sympathetic division, these are shorter. Okay, and the postganglionic neurons, so postganglionic neuron in sympathetic division are longer, but in these cases parasympathetic division, the preganglionic neuron are longer, and the postganglionic neuron are shorter, just reverse of sympathetic division. Okay, and the postganglionic fiber have the numerous and mostly adrenergic, and in this cases the postganglionic fiber are fewer and these are the cholinergic. Okay, and mainly the overall function is excitatory. So the sympathetic division, the overall function is excitatory. Okay, and in cases of parasympathetic division, the overall function is inhibitory. And if we see another diagram which actually describe the distribution and the functions of this autonomic division, and then you can clearly understand about this process. Okay, so the sympathetic division are actually developed from the thoracolumbar region of the spinal cord, and the neurons are actually developed from the thoracolumbar regions of the spinal cord. And here you can see the sympathetic division from the chain ganglion. So the ganglions are arranged in a chain, so there will be presence of the chain ganglion, and the preganglionic neuron are shorter and the postganglionic neuron are the longer. Okay, so what will be the functions of the sympathetic division? The sympathetic division functions mainly the excitatory, so they dilates the pupil of the eye. This is an important, okay, this is an important point. Actually they dilates the pupil of the eye, and also they inhibits the salivary gland secretion, and relaxes the bronchi of the lungs and accelerates the heart. So I am highlighting only those regions which are important, and inhibits the activity of the stomach and intestine, inhibits the activity of the pancreas, and stimulates the glucose release from the liver, and inhibits the gallbladder, and stimulates the adrenal medulla. This is an important. So since the sympathetic division stimulates the adrenal medulla, there will be developed another important structure which is called as the sympathetico-adrenal system. So sympathetico-adrenal system. Sometimes in these cases the adrenal gland functions as the just like the postganglionic neuron. So sympathetico-adrenal system. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system actually activate the adrenal medulla and inhibits the emptying of the bladder and promotes the ejaculation and the vaginal contractions. Okay, so these are actually the functions of the sympathetic division. Next, the parasympathetic division. Here you can see that there will be there will be no such development of the chain ganglion. So this is the chain ganglion. So the chain ganglion are developed in sympathetic system, but in parasympathetic system no chain ganglion are developed. Okay, and the preganglionic neuron are longer. So the preganglionic neuron are longer and the postganglionic neuron are shorter. Okay, and the usual functions are the inhibitory, and they constricts the pupil of the eye. This is very important. Okay, or parasympathetic division actually constrict the pupils of the eye and stimulates the salivary gland secretion, but whereas the sympathetic division inhibits the salivary gland secretion, and this constricts the bronchi of the lungs, but this relaxes the bronchi of the lungs. Sympathetic division. Parasympathetic division slows the heart, and the sympathetic division accelerates the heart rate, and this stimulates the activity of the stomach and the intestine. Parasympathetic division, but sympathetic division inhibits the activity of the stomach and intestine, and parasympathetic division stimulates the activity of the pancreas, but this inhibits the activity of the pancreas, and this stimulates the gallbladder and stimulates the glucose release from the gallbladder and inhibits the gallbladder. Okay, and parasympathetic division promotes the emptying of the bladder, and this inhibits the emptying of the bladder. Sympathetic division. And the parasympathetic division promotes the erection of the ganglion. Okay, and this promotes the ejaculation and the vaginal contraction. So this is actually the functions of sympathetic division. Okay, so we have discussed about the different regions of the nervous system which are really important for any types of your exam. Okay, and we have focused only those regions which are really important, and only we have focused the conceptual regions of the nervous system, and hope you have clearly understand about the total nervous system. And next we will analyze each and every topics in details